Hi, my name is Lucinda Walker, and I am the library director of the Norwich Public Library in Norwich, Vermont. Like many people you might see in these videos, I work from home one day a week, which is why this is my background instead of my office. I have been a librarian for 30 years, and I've been the director in Norwich for almost 18 years. Like many librarians, I came to the job through other jobs. When I was in college, I majored in history and communications. At that time, I thought I might like to work in the publishing industry. But actually, my first job out of college was with a management training program for a department store. And while I did not particularly like working in the department store, what I did like was learning about what made excellent customer service and how to be an active listener. And both of those skills have been very important as I've made my way through the library world all these years. After leaving the department store world, I became a researcher for a financial newspaper in New York City. I was responsible for getting background information for the reporters as they were working on different stories related to the finance industry. Now, to be completely honest with you, I had no interest in the financial industry, but what I did like was the research. This was done before the internet, so I spent a lot of time in libraries. I spent a lot of time interviewing people to get answers to questions, and I really loved that. I'm a big mystery book fan, and so actually being a researcher is almost like being a detective because you're trying to track down the most accurate information you can to make sure that you're providing it to someone and that they're getting the best information. So because I liked that so much, it was my mom actually who suggested I go to library school. At first I did not think that was a great idea. To be completely frank, didn't really like most of the librarians I knew growing up. That was at a time when libraries were places of you had to be quiet, so I got shushed a lot because I'm kind of a talker, and I always felt like the librarians were perhaps keeping me from all the good books that I wanted to read. But I did apply to library school, and I knew from the very first day that this was actually the right place for me. Everyone I met was really interesting and had a real sense of curiosity about the world, and everyone had that helping gene that is so important if you want to become a librarian. Now, the other cool thing about being a librarian is there are lots of different types of librarians. There are school librarians, there are children's librarians that work in public libraries, there are medical librarians and law librarians, there are art librarians, there are librarians that work for specific associations. So really, the world is kind of large in that way. Music librarians. My first job out of library school was working for the Brooklyn Museum in their art library, which was really tremendous. Later on, I moved out west and I worked as a researcher for a television company, which was also kind of fun and exciting. And I ended up as a periodicals librarian in San Francisco, which meant I was responsible for buying all the magazines and then answering questions on the reference desk. Again, that sort of detective work, which I had always liked. I moved back to Vermont in 2001 with my family and got the job in Norwich as a public librarian. And I have to say, it has been a wonderful, wonderful job. The best part, in my opinion, of being a librarian are the connections that you make with people in your community. You get to know people really well, particularly in small libraries, which Vermont mostly has small libraries. As I said, I've been in Norwich for 18 years, which means I have actually seen children being born and then graduate from high school. In some cases, some of the kids I knew when they were in 7th and 8th grade have actually moved back to Norwich with their own children. And that has been just wonderful to feel to be part of that fabric of the community. The other great thing about being a librarian is you kind of don't know what's going to happen from day to day. Particularly in a public school, a public library, you you're working with the public, so whoever comes through the door and whatever issue they have, that's kind of what your day is going to be. But as a library director, I have a little bit more control over how I spend my time. So a typical day. A typical day is I check in with everyone who I work with, my colleagues, to make sure that they have what it is they need to do, either for that day or for any projects they're working on. I always spend part of the day answering lots of emails. We might be setting up projects with other organizations. For example, this week we're working with the Historical Society on a public art piece. So we have 7 people coming to the library to be in our parking lot outside, socially distant, to do a big painting mural as part of a public piece that will be displayed on Dan and Witt's, which is one of our general stores. I will also be working on the budget, which, let me just be straight with you, I was never great at math, but boy, am I great at math now. Part of being a library director, and an important part, is making sure the library has enough money to do what it needs to do. So part of my job is fundraising and going out, meeting people, writing grants, sending letters to ask for funds for helping the library stay open. The other piece is budgeting, and that part of the job, although it might feel overwhelming at times, actually is one of the more creative parts to my day, which is when you're coming up with a budget for the future, you have to be really thoughtful and creative to think about what will your library need a year from now, 2 years from now. Now, the current COVID pandemic has really created both challenges and opportunities in this regard. And last night I was on a Zoom meeting with some members of my board of trustees, who are my bosses, and we were talking about what are some of the things the library is going to need in the next year or two. And in normal times, I would say, well, we need money for books and DVDs and magazines. I need money to pay my staff and make sure they have health insurance. I want to make sure that we're doing programming for toddlers and middle schoolers and high schoolers and adults. And I want to make sure the library building can be kept up to code, that everything looks fresh and has been painted. But now I need to be thinking even bigger. I need to be thinking, what do we need to do to change the library so that it can become still a safe and healthy place for people to come to. Right now we're thinking about changing the entire inside of the library. We are replacing our furniture. We're going to get bookshelves that are on wheels so we can change the configuration. We are getting lots of new computers for the staff to use in case we have to work from home, for the public to borrow. We are getting lots of different craft materials so that we can create take-home craft bags so that families have things to do at home. So it's actually kind of fun and exciting to think about what the library is going to look like in the future. People often think that librarians are librarians because we like to read, and I do think that is true. Most librarians really do like to read. But one of the dirty secrets about the job is we often don't have time to read when we're at work. The only time that I get to read when I'm at work outside of email is when I get to choose what items we're going to add to the shelf. And that actually is a really fun part of the job. I get a lot of different magazines, and I look at websites that review books and movies and audiobooks. And I think about what the people in Norwich, in our community, what it is they like to read. The children's librarian, Beth, she spends her time looking at things to add to the children's shelves and the young adult shelves. We have a lot of readers in Norwich, and so we have to make sure that our bookshelves are filled with new items. We also have a lot of downloadable ebooks and audiobooks now available. We have streaming services so that people can stream things, movies and documentaries. That's a whole new part of our job, which we didn't have, I would say, 15 years ago. Now, if you wanted to become a librarian, what do I think is sort of the best things to have? Well, I'll tell you, I think it's good to have a sense of humor. Working with the public can be challenging, but it can be very rewarding at the same time. As a librarian, you have to be willing to meet people where they are. Often people will come in and they might be kind of grumpy or feeling rushed, or maybe they just had a tough morning, and sometimes they just need to let that out. And as a librarian, you often are listening to people and trying to reflect back to them, what it is that they're looking for. The best thing that can happen to me on any day at work is if someone comes in and they have no idea what they want, and by the time they leave, their arms are filled with items from our shelves. Or perhaps I've told them about a podcast to listen to, or maybe a website to look at. So it's really good to be able to have this helping gene, to be a good listener, to have a sense of humor, and to be curious. There is so much information in the world right now. We are constantly bombarded with tweets and Snapchats and Instagram posts and Instagram Live, and our grandmothers are on Facebook. We're getting emails. We're learning online, and so much information can be overwhelming. Librarians, another big part of my job is to ensure that people understand what information is based on fact and what information is based on opinion. And that's gotten harder with each passing year. We do tech help at the library, and sometimes that tech help is helping people navigate their iPhones or their tablets. I once had a woman come in with her landline. I was able to help her with that. But now we see a lot of people coming in and they're just trying to understand the information that's flowing into their lives. What is the truth? What's based on fact? And that can be a really interesting conversation to have with people. And librarians are trained to know that. So, in a nutshell, I love being a library director. I love feeling that I'm an important part of a community. I love knowing that our patrons are getting what it is that they need, be it a book or advice on what to read next, or right now with homeschooling, helping parents choose the things that they need to help their kids learn at home. We love to have kids come to the library. For years, we were the place to hang out after school, and so that can be really fun. Things are a little different with COVID, but the library is still there, and I hope all of you use your library. And if you ever have any questions, ask the librarian. We love to answer questions. We love to feel helpful, and we just really love serving the public. So that's being a library director, and if you are ever interested in learning more, I would be delighted to speak with you. Thanks so much, and be well.